How's it going, y'all? My name is Aiden Anderson, and this is Candidate Candids. In this series, I'm going out to meet and talk with the candidates in the upcoming Moscow City Council election to better know them and to better understand their platform and how they hope to serve our community. In this interview, I meet with City Council candidate Evan Holmes. Let's get into it. Evan, how are you doing this morning?
So far, so good. It's a beautiful October day. I'm sorry to see them diminishing.
Indeed, indeed. Feels like the last breath of the summer here, which is, it's wonderful, but also a little bit sad because it's only going to get colder from here.
Right, but we remain enthusiastic because it is election season.
Or something like that, anyway.
Right.
I do have to ask, because I've asked the other candidates so far, just in this part of the election season, how have things been going for you?
Oh, well, and it's similar to how the job will be. You have to anticipate some things and get yourself ready, but sometimes you're only slightly ahead of the power curve, and that comes with the territory.
Mm-hmm. It does seem that there's always some sort of event, always some sort of forum, a lot of different things going on, and if I recall correctly from the stuff you put out on social media about your campaign on your website, you're running this whole show yourself, pretty much. Is that correct?
Well, my wife and I are running it, and I do have some help from Bruce Pittman, who's my treasurer. But otherwise, I'm pretty well versed in how this works. And there's one caveat I'll throw in there, that when you're campaigning, there's a lot of things you can do, and 50% of them will be very effective, and 50% of them will be a waste of time. And you don't know till after the election's over which was which.
Mm-hmm. So far, what have you found to be effective, and what have you found to be that waste of time?
Surprisingly effective is driving a truck around with a big sign saying, "Vote for Evan Holmes" on it. Surprisingly effective, because Larry Hodge, in his days on council, who was an unknown and got elected barely, and I asked him, well, how did that work? He said, really, name recognition. If people at least have heard your name before, it can make that slight bit of difference.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And it does seem to be the case with the signs that you see around town. Generally, people assume, oh, well, those are the people to vote for. And that might not be the full extent of people who are running that year, but if you see the signs, that's who you think of.
Right, and there's other ways to campaign that get the name out through mailings, newspaper ads, radio ads, and things of that ilk. But like I said, you don't know how effective they are. You can't survey until after the election, really, to get any effective results. So the best campaign spends the most money and does them all. I've always believed in the low-budget, grassroots, bootstrap type of campaigning because it's fun and really removes some of the stress about worrying ahead of time whether something you're doing was done really well or was useful or not. It's choose what you like to do and know you can do well, and do that, and network as well as you can and accept the results.
Indeed, because especially at the local level, there's always an opportunity to engage with people even outside the campaigning process, even outside the process of becoming an elected official. It might change how you interact with them, certainly, but you're still able to continue those relationships. They don't just go away because, all right, I ran and I didn't win, so there's nothing more to be said.
But you get a lot of attention when you're running that can disappear once you're elected, and some people have found that startling. I was walking Orchard Avenue. I went to Orchard Avenue a couple days ago to put a sign in at a request, and a friend of mine drove by and waved to him as he went by. 3 hours later almost, he laughed. He told me yesterday, he said, "You spent the entire day on Orchard Avenue." I said, I was out there for a 10-minute task, and people started coming out of their houses to talk to me, and some wanted to talk about the election, some wanted to talk about a construction project that we had a mutual connection with long ago, and some wanted to complain about the snow plowing that the city does because they think I'm already on city council and that I can affect how the snow plows run down Orchard Avenue. So,
Oh, man.
but he was right. He laughed and said, "You're not campaigning. You're just standing around on Orchard Avenue."
Well, I'll give a little bit of insight into myself here. My brother and I, initially coming from the Midwest, have always held snow removal in high regard. And so coming out to Idaho, it can be a little bit of a shock, understandably.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
But then, of course, that's just the nature of being a small town, is you have limited resources at one level, but you make the best with what you have.
Yeah, which, would get me into one of the things I like talking about for the actual job of city council, which isn't very exciting to talk about in the campaign for city council, is budgeting. And the whole budget process is crucial because budgeting, which I think I have a real interest in facility for, I just like the numbers and understand the spreadsheet aspect of it, having run through business. But that sets the goals for the year, because people come to council and say, can we do something about this? Can we do something about that? And it's, if you've anticipated it correctly and allocated money for it, maybe you can. But if you haven't, it's not like the money's in a one big pot and you just take money out as you need it. So some things seem like they get neglected because there was no money for it forecast in the past, maybe so 6 months past. And that's the case with snow removal. You make a guess. What's snow removal going to cost? You decide that in May. What's it going to cost for the next? And it's like, okay, now there's, and so we've run into those problems in the city, and it's the city council's fault.
But it is difficult to prepare for because, like you said, you're preparing for something in May. Who knows what can happen 6 months later when you're in the thick of it? Maybe it was a heavier year for snow, and how could you have predicted that back in May when you initially set up the budget to pay for stuff?
Yeah, and it's not just the snow, it's the equipment and the personnel, and things can happen with them. I got a job with the school district once that went on for years and years because a long-term employee, Joe Darrington, when the 1912 Center still belonged to the school system, and he was the guy that took care of the warehousing of furniture and the movement of supplies, and he also did the mail, and he went 17 years without missing a day, and now he missed some days right at the time someone had to do the mail to get the paychecks out. And so I got a job basically being his emergency substitute because I already knew how to do some of the things he did, which was a long-standing relationship with the school district. When the normal people couldn't come in, it morphed into more. I would be the guy that get the call at 5 in the morning to go open up the high school and get it prepared for the regular staff that would start getting there at 7, because Joe and a few other people always did that. But when they realized when he wasn't available, there was nobody.
And that's a difficulty of knowing which positions are needed to be relied upon and which positions over the long term need to have successors lined up, need to have those people in line. A city council election every 4 years or so, it seems much more crucial, but at the end of the day, they turn over at a far faster rate than some of these positions that, when they do need to be turned over or somebody is leaving, or like you said, somebody has a few days off and there's no replacement, it can significantly impact the way that people interact with infrastructure in ways that they would have never previously thought about.
Right, and snow removal can be one of those. A truck breaks down, or someone, especially with COVID type of responses now, where we want people to not come to work if they're showing symptoms of things. Your absenteeism goes up. At city council, these are, like I said, these aren't the exciting things, but the budget is built from the departments coming and telling you their anticipated needs, and COVID has made parts of that more difficult because we are actually including, and should, more absenteeism to prevent spreads, and so their budget needs are greater to provide the same level of service.
Indeed. So it's a degree of making sure that you're doing the right thing, but also recognizing the consequences of any given decision that you make, both on the positive side and on the negative side, where there's always going to be a downfall to any action you take, because either it means, well, we paid for this project, but that means we can't pay for this other project,
Right.
or what have you.
And that other project may suddenly become an emergency in November, and May didn't know and the money wasn't there. So the city council members have to have great facility with that aspect of managing the city. Being on city council is running a business. That's probably the main thing you're doing.
It's funny because a lot of people, I can imagine, hear that statement and become very frustrated, because isn't a city council's job to act as a representative of the people or something like that? And yet at the same time, there's very clearly distinct operations that they need to be maintaining that go above and beyond what any given cultural issue might be of the day.
Right, and that's where, Bill Belknap is the city supervisor. We have a weak mayor system where the mayor is, doesn't, basically a weak mayor system, if I was going to go to one thing, the mayor does not have veto power over legislation.
Mm-hmm.
So they're involved and they run the meetings and all that, but they can't veto. So in the broad sense, it's a weak mayor system, but the mayor does hire and manage the city supervisor, and we are lucky to have Bill Belknap, who's been started in this with the city on a very low level, and now you can count on him to be quite aware of what's going on and anticipate needs also, and know all the personnel. So it does allow the city council to be, as you say, the figureheads, the spokespeople that are kind of a buffer between, or a connection between, the citizens and all these people that are in operations.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Now, in small towns, my wife and I had a business called Interpretive Media Productions, which we won't try to explain. But once we did community meetings trying to introduce consensus building exercises in small communities throughout the Northwest, from Swan Valley, Idaho, to Heartline and Elmira, Wilbur, Washington. The biggest community I went into was Jackson, Wyoming, and in those communities there is not much buffer between the operations people that go out and work on the streets or provide the water and the community. So they don't have the buffer. And like I said, the face of all these operations is the city council and the mayor. And so we do a good job of that so that people that work for the city can do their work.
Mm-hmm. And just to briefly tie this back to what we were originally talking about with the budget side of things, as a citizen, it's always a little bit daunting when the budget public hearing comes about, because for the most part, it's this massive document with a lot of details that as a citizen, you might not be privy to all of the information or know how particulars of the budget function or what works, what doesn't. And so that can make it very difficult to interact with in terms of providing positive or negative feedback when it comes to
any feedback, right? Mm-hmm. And this year's budget, around 240 pages, and it's done in a very good way for accounting purposes. But if you look at it, you'll see some things are split up into categories and line items in one place, and then there's more of that operation, let's say streets or something like that, somewhere else. And what I would like to create, and I do it for myself, is a shorter, more concise, consolidated budget document that you could give to people ahead of the hearings that no one goes to. I liked Jerry Schutz one time because he had gone to a couple of those. He mentioned he had gone to a couple of those and tried to be a good citizen, and he was the only one. And so then you feel compelled, it's a public hearing, to say something about it. But
Mm-hmm.
well, good for him, but it's too difficult to stand up at a public hearing about those and sound like you know what you're talking about, because the budget document is a wonderful accounting document, but for the average person, it's obtuse.
Do you think there are ways, tying back in the city councilors as spokespeople for the people who are running the internal operations of the city, who are providing the facilities and infrastructure, and who are doing a lot of that accounting stuff, do you think there are ways in which the city council itself could be a mechanism for making this, something like the budget or any other document of that type, less obtuse? Or is that really asking a lot of a city councilor in terms of their role?
It's asking a lot if you expect it. It's not written in the job contract, but I can do it. And it takes some time and some facility, but being on city council then gives you an easy access to walk into the office of the department heads and say, here, let's take all these numbers, or into the finance department and says, let's consolidate them this way and give me one number. Now they will hesitate. People will, and I've done this before, they will hesitate to do that. And I'll say, it doesn't have to be perfectly accurate. Let's just say there's $7 million spent for this. I don't care really for the public document whether it's 6.8 million or 7.3. We're going to say approximately this, approximately that, because I like to talk about things like how much do we spend actually to haul our garbage to Boardman, Oregon. You would be surprised how much it costs to, because we don't have a regional landfill and haven't, maybe we need to get more invigorated discussions with Whitman County, Latah County, and others to work through a long process to do that, if for no other reason for combating climate change. So that's a lot of money, but the true costs of it get not obfuscated, but broken up into parts that are contracts for this, fuel for that, and things like that. So you don't know what does this cost, but I think we can do that. I think there's 30 or 40 categories. You can say this is about what this costs every year. This is about what's paid for by grants and state money, whatever. And here's how, this is the crucial part, what I like to do, and it's hard to do, is how much of the total tax money do we collect go towards this one particular operation? And just as a fun thing, we're now being challenged by something that's been a fee in this town for, I think, since about 1997, and that is for street lights. That might more properly have to be a tax. There's some things that, like I say, when you go through these budget lines and you want to know exactly what things cost, well, some things are paid for partly by fees and partly by tax, but I think the court system is now saying the street lights have to be paid entirely by tax and not by fees. It's $2 or $3 a month per household, but they've finally come around to thinking, wait a minute, you can't call that a fee. I don't know the intricacies why, but when you create this public-friendly budget document, it'll just be in there as a street operations cost. Well, there's a long answer to. Okay, and that wraps it up for today.
Exactly.
Now we've talked about what everyone wanted to know about, and that is the cost of streetlights.
Well, just to give context for our audience here, there was a recent decision in a judicial case out of Lewiston regarding that city's public streetlight utility fee, and the court ruled that, I'm not sure if it was that the streetlight fee was too expensive or that the streetlight fee shouldn't exist, but either way, it was it was such a ruling that it threw into question, in the Moscow City Council's mind, the legality of their own public street lighting fee. And so recently, so this would have been, at the beginning of this past week?
Yeah, it's very recently
that
the ruling came down.
They repealed the portion of city code that dictates what the street lighting utility fee is, and also removed the cost for the fee from their fiscal year.
The 2024 budget, basically.
And so that's where that issue comes from, just how that stands within the context of the stuff that we're talking about. I'm sure we'll hear more about it just because they're waiting to find out if the courts in fact said, hey, you can have this fee, but it can't exceed this amount of money. That was the problem in Lewiston, or what have you.
And that has broader implications, because we have done a lot of revenue collection to support these lines in our budget through fees that beyond just the streetlight. There is paying off the money borrowed for the sewage treatment plant, and things that, to me, fees are usage based. And so what the courts are determining, that is true. When you have to pay a certain amount per month for owning a property as the property owner, regardless of whether there's any usage or not, you can't call that a usage fee. It seems pretty simple, but the contract and legality aspects of that it might even put Aiden to sleep. Although I'll take that back. It wouldn't. He'd be fascinated by it. So there's some of that coming up to City Council. We may have to restructure based on this little foreshadowing that we see from the street lighting thing. We may have to restructure our revenue stream, and I have some facility and interest in that, and so I do bring that along. And what brings me now, I have to tell a story. Please put me on City Council so that I can share anecdotes. And just to start with a statement I could end with, I've never met a public hearing I didn't like. Here's a kindred soul over here. So public hearings aren't always just about the issue at hand. It's about seeing who's out in the public, the voter pool, the citizens that are paying attention. And you learn, if you're an amateur sociologist, then public hearings are a place to go. The first one I went to that I recall in Moscow, which was probably Bill Voxman and Nick Crookston on council, and Marshall Comstock in his first years, and Paul Gideus as the mayor. And their city council meeting, and I don't remember if it was a special meeting just about this, went on for hours. And it was exhausting for the council. So maybe you other council candidates would like to drop out now, because these things, anyway, it was...
be prepared for those 3 and 4 hour meetings.
Right, and some of which I've presided over. But this one was pretty much about whether the cost of trash collection in town, which had to go up, was going to go up based on the number of cans you put out, and therefore could go up from like $7 a month to somewhere between $7.50 and $7.90 a month. Big numbers here. Or if they did kind of flat fee it to everyone, and then everyone might be paying $8.50 a month. And people had opinions. And so I sat there as a relative newcomer here in town, and new property owner through that, and people quibbling over the intricacies of how much trash they put out, and I have a family of 9 and blah, 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 and whether or not it should be a unit. And I walked away from that saying, these are my people. They were. I thought, this is one, because I have never met a public hearing I didn't like. And that was my first immersion into government of Moscow.
Excellent. And you've been here, I want to argue, I might be completely off base with this, but I want to argue that you're probably the most long-lived resident of Moscow within this current pool of candidates for this city council year. And one question that comes off of that is, okay, you've been in Moscow the longest, you have all of this passion, like you're saying, these are my people. Why decide to run this year as opposed to any other year that you've been in Moscow?
Well, it's an intricate answer, I guess. I would have run in a couple previous cycles, but once my kids were out of the house and going off on their own, we could get away in the summer again. So I actually worked 3 summers for the National Park Service, 2015, 2017, those election cycles. I worked at Mount Rainier National Park in 2017. I was probably the oldest backcountry ranger in the national park system in 2017 at Olympic National Park. I worked at the Wilderness Information Center and did backcountry patrols. And like I said, I would like to research whether or not there was anyone. But that aside, the jobs extended through September. So those cycles were out. And then previous to that, the elections had become pretty partisan here. Even though we say it's nonpartisan, there were political groups that were gathering candidates ahead of time and running them as blocks and doing very effective political type of activities to get their candidates elected. Well, that's politics. An election is the imperfect marriage between politics and marketing. Mm-hmm. However, I am unaffiliated and intend to stay always unaffiliated with any political party, even if they remove the Republican Party name or they remove the Democratic Party name and call themselves something else. But when they engage in those sorts of political activities in order to get candidates elected without, and it's doable, it's demonstrable. You can get degrees in this to be effective rather than this sort of thing where let's get to know the candidates and not just know what political group, which is motivated by gaining and maintaining power. That's what political groups do. They're private clubs, rather than what they tell us to do, and they manipulate our thinking with their advertising campaigns. Well, that was strong here in Moscow for a while, so I lost interest in trying to insert myself into that highly partisan political process. However, the last couple election cycles haven't seen that. So it's like, oh, that's refreshing. We're kind of back down to the, what do you know and how well connected are you and what can you do to keep the ball rolling to make this an effective community?
Mm-hmm. And there's definitely, I think that's on everyone's minds, the idea of just because we say it's nonpartisan doesn't mean there isn't partisan activity. And I think that's going to happen regardless of what the election is or what the stakes are. There are people who are going to say, hey, vote for our team or vote for the other team or what have you. And there is always the possibility that an issue is going to come up that has strong divisions along partisan lines of that sort. Not necessarily party lines, but partisan lines, because
polarizing.
And I guess one question, as somebody who is advocating for independence on fronts like that, how do you think about interacting with those controversies, or maybe even if you have more anecdotes, what are controversies that you've worked through with people that highlight how you would go through that process?
Well, there's polarization and there's separation. We've had separation before on things as simple as whether or not to have the pay-as-you-go garbage collection. We had it here once where you would put a tag out with your garbage. So if you didn't have garbage to put out, you didn't pay for it. So it wasn't a fee. Or it wasn't a tax. You were actually paying a fee. And then there was some separation on people. Wait, we want to keep that system. I was in favor of the roll cart type system because it's easier on the back of the people who are collecting garbage. It's more efficient. So that is the final argument on that. So there's separation. Now, polarization in town has happened a few times, and everyone wants to talk about the Christchurch, New St. Andrews type of polarization, which has effects here and will have lingering effects and cannot, from either side of that gulf, cannot be corrected by the city council. Mm-hmm. And they would certainly like to, but to delve into it a little bit more, I as a citizen, I see errors made on both sides, but just to choose one that widened the gulf is, if someone came here today and said, we want to open a Christian college of a minor population, 150 students, And we think Moscow is a good place for it. Had that been the case in the early 90s, we would have said, good, we'll work with you. We'll find a place that needs redevelopment and can accommodate that. However, the way it came up to us was, we are going to open one, and we're going to put it in the central business district. So we're going to take some highly taxable property and remove it from the tax rolls. We're going to take some potential retail space, remove that from retail activity, and we're going to put it next to Friendship Square, just because, so that our activity then is taking over a beloved, long-standing kind of town square meeting place for a bigger group of people that are Moscow. And it also will exacerbate a problem we talked about and still do, parking downtown. So what that looked like was not an argument about the value of a Christian education, or it wasn't a discussion of theology or about the always existing struggle that an individual will go through about a simultaneously forgiving yet vengeful God. It wasn't about those things. It was about zoning and parking, and it was almost like an intentionally antagonistic way to establish this valuable and loving type of amenity to the town. And so you can kind of expect when people feel like they've been slapped in the face, they might slap back. Mm-hmm. And so we get ripple effects from that to this day. I don't have an answer to that except civility, empathy. If people on either side think this other side is wrong and they are being duped by excessively progressive type of dogma, or they're being duped by a entrepreneur disguised as a theologian, let's have empathy for all those people, because if one side's right, then there's a lot of victims on the other side that need empathy. Oh, well, if the other side's right, wow, there's a lot of victims that need a lot of empathy. And so when it comes down to it, we certainly have to redouble our empathy. I learned something almost anecdotal. Warning. Do we have a sign, antidote coming, so we can put up there?
I can put a little side screen that goes past, and then we'll go into it. We'll change the music and everything.
I was complimented at times for doing what are called interrogations, but in the law enforcement field. I'm a former federal law enforcement officer. I had a law enforcement commission that I used with the National Park Service for 6 to 7 years. And you do what you call interviews as a law enforcement officer, and which the public would call an interrogation. But I had supervisors that say, Evan, you go handle this guy. You go in and talk to him, because we're trying to investigate to see if there's enough admission or innuendo to justify the cost of an investigation, or even to meet the benchmark of probable cause. And I was sent in to do that on several occasions, because I always went in with, you have to have empathy for the person you are quote unquote interrogating, and the big thing you learn, you have to meet them more than halfway. Mm. And I don't see the gulf between the anti-Christ church type of sentiment in town or the leadership of the conservative Christian community. Really, I don't see either side going more than halfway. Mm-hmm. They go to halfway and butt heads a little bit. You know what? It's part of the identity of the town. It's one of the things that come with saying that we're going to make a very livable town, and some of it's created by climate and geography. We can't. City council can't take credit in saying, well, we have nice geography here and a good climate, and therefore please re-elect us. And some of that has been through the efforts of past city councils and mayors and I can talk about other divisions in town that brings to mind, but they've worked things out and created this lovely, welcoming, helpful town. And people that come here to visit then start thinking, I don't want to just be a visitor, I want to live there, and things like that. So our success has brought in not just people like us, but people that aren't like us. And so we have to be very accepting of that. That comes with the territory. Here's another division. At one point, Linda Paul was the big pusher for this. We needed development of Mountain View Road because it was just kind of a country lane and it was not safe. The intersections weren't safe. And so the bond was put, finally it came down to putting a bond before the citizens of Moscow, who defeated it narrowly, which was a disappointment to the city council and all that, because there was going to be a boulevard, but it was going to be a boulevard. The good thing was it was going to be a boulevard. The bad thing was it was going to be a boulevard. It was going to have medians with plantings and lights and all that. It was a case of city council overreaching and asking the citizenry to overspend. So it created a gulf or a separation. I want to, and those things come to play when you have a referendum. We had one with the school bond here that showed a separation, and so, yeah, there's a lot, and I know about a lot of these things. Like you said, I've been here long enough that I can remember. I learned something through all of this and through participating, being on committees, a downtown revitalization committee, which, we're getting back to the New St. Andrews thing. I was on the downtown revitalization committee. I think Rob Spear from the University of Idaho, who was the athletic director, and I might have been two of the few people who were on this committee. Me as a citizen at large that didn't own a downtown business, and him as a representative from the University of Idaho, and we would talk afterwards, and these meetings were passionate, and but they were run by stakeholders that had businesses in the downtown, and so we're hammering out, and I had experience as a consensus builder because I mentioned projects earlier through Interpretive Media Productions, and we have to get this in here because I haven't said this in years. We were working with federal government money that was part of the Interior Columbia River Basin Ecosystem Management Project, which no one has heard of. Anyway, so he and I were kind of outsiders in that we didn't have a dog in the fight in terms of businesses. And so we lay a lot of groundwork and thinking and come up with plans and all that, and all well and good. And then wasn't very much longer before here comes New St. Andrews College, and all that gets forgotten about, because what ultimately determines what happens with your downtown or your neighborhoods is who owns the property. And we in Idaho, in Moscow, we're not going to take away someone's property rights because we have a difference of opinion about how they think we should live or which church we should go to and things like that. So, it's ironic that there was a lot of discussion and time spent in that. And it's like, well, had we known that, all the planning might have been different.
Exactly. And there's ways in which, you're looking at the way things are now, and you, having been in town for so long, can see how some of these things came to be, maybe see how things could have turned out differently. But either way, we are where we are right now. And the question has a lot more to do with, well, how do we move forward as a community in terms of living together, in terms of making decisions that, if you've been here 30 years, what about the next 30 years for all of the people And for all the people who, like you said, are coming into town, and whether they share the same values or are of the same type of community stock as us.
The right type of people.
Exactly. But like you said, they're attracted to the same sorts of things that we
Absolutely.
like our town for.
Yeah.
So the question comes down to how we as a community can interact with each other to sustain the next 30 years as a healthy community, as a community that can continue to enjoy the things that we enjoy now, while also recognizing that mistakes get made, there are differences of opinions, and some, like those gulfs you were talking about, some divides aren't going to be crossed, or at least not very quickly.
No, and there's been a lot of those. Those things have existed in our country. It's one of the beautiful things about the fabric of this country that I think in other countries they don't understand. Countrywide, we get along. Not just Moscow. It's something that we expect to do, and I think it starts with the nurturing of young kids, that the expectation is at the end of the day you're going to get along, and when a need arises, you're going to meet it. When someone needs help, you're going to help them. And I've lived in a lot of places in the country, and that's the general attitude, especially in neighborhoods that have a lot of mixed type of backgrounds and beliefs, and that came from the Declaration of Independence on, and that we hope continues to override the other things so that we can get things done and move forward. In all this, the 35 years that I've been involved in watching Moscow government and being part of it, people say, well, weren't you on city council back there in the 20 years ago? Because I was presiding over something that is called the Board of Appeals here, where we hear appeals of judgments made by the Zoning Board of Adjustment and things like that. And we'd have discussions well into the night about zoning for New St. Andrews College, or about the location of the ice rink and things like that. So sat in those same seats and did some of the same activities, but for a different reason, to make a ruling, quasi-judicial ruling on some actions by boards or the city council that people challenged legally. Mm-hmm. So I learned from that and all this observation. There's three ways that primarily, if you were going to just put a tag on them, that the city council or the local government or even bigger governments would lose connection or lose the support of their constituency, and that is to overreach, to overcomplicate, and to overspend. Those are in the back of my head after we've talked about our philosophies on issues, after we've come up with an action plan, after we've set goals, as with a group of experts. We have a lot of standing committees with the city that do all the yeoman's work for gathering information. They have experts. I'm going to go into city council and not be an expert on anything, and yet there's experts on things that will come right here to my door and tell me stuff, or think, or send me an email, and I'm getting them already, and saying, oh, don't forget this, and that's great, because they do those committees and they get us to our goal setting, and we do that in kind of an insulated way, even if there's 500 people involved, because we've invited them to workshops and we've hired consultants to survey, and that 500 isn't enough. You always, at the end, you've got all this stuff programmed and you have expectations of how it's going to flow through. In the back of my head, I'm going to say, now, will we be seen, whether it's true or not, to be overreaching, overcomplicating, or overspending?
I think on that note, very clearly, through just seeing the different campaigns, like what people are putting on their website and that sort of thing, and seeing what's being brought up at these forums, there seem to be a couple issues that are being focused on as a theme of this election, if you will. And I am curious what the difference is in your mind between the theme of this election, in terms of, I think the big ones would be development and the water climate issues, how those intersect, and then just the general nature of the community and local, those being like the three headliners. But what would you say is the difference between the theme for this campaign season and the actual issues or priorities that the city is or ought to be focusing on?
Well, if you are a member of or a candidate in this campaign, by the end of it, you'll be trained in what we know almost certain to be issues. As you mentioned, the affordable housing dilemma will have ripple effects for years. Mm-hmm. We need a rapid response, and there's machinery in place to do that, to help with that, whether it's increased interactions with the public-private partnerships, and increasing that sort of thing to take care of people who are most adversely affected by it. But then there's also the immediate ability to create the pathway towards more affordable housing within the zoning codes we have, and within the land owners and development they have, which is generally out in the county. We have to get on that one way or another. No one's going to argue that. We almost don't need it to come up in a forum, because
no one's in disagreement about
no,
it.
we're going to have, and what we might disagree on, what's the biggest ripple effect going to be from that issue? I don't know what the biggest. And the water thing is interesting. There's some potential solutions that come and go here that get promoted. At one time it was recharging aquifers through insertion, and that was a big thing like 20 years ago. I don't hear about that anymore. I think that's failed other places. It's like fracking. Let's frack our water supply. I think places have found, maybe that's not a good idea, so let's not. Anyway, so they come and go, and there's the piping from the Snake River, which I have spoken generally in a skeptical way about, because with, whether you accept it or not, the causes of climate change, if we are creating reduced snowpack in the mountains and reduced water flow through the Snake River, which is where we're looking at potentially piping water from, it's possible that all that water is spoken for. Water rights in the western U.S., there's wonderful books about it. Beyond the 100th Meridian is basically a history of the western U.S. that says that it's shaped by the allocation of water and what to do about it. And so that might be a short-term solution, but I don't think that someone will ultimately be allowed to sell. And the thing that is interesting is some of these solutions to difficulties we see, to challenges, aren't holistic. Mm-hmm. We have the same people saying, well, we could maybe pipe water from the collection pools at Lower Granite Dam. Might be the same people who say, well, we need to retain all the water we can for salmon habitat downstream, who might be the same people saying, yeah, we got to get rid of Lower Granite Dam. And you're going, well, wait a minute, how can we do all these things? We can't do them all. So I wouldn't count on water from the Snake River to solve our problem. The one thing that will help us solve the problem is funding whatever solution, whether it's 10 years in the future, 20, 50, now. And people say, well, you can't ask the taxpayers to fund something now. And I have done this 100 times in discussions about people, about houses. Because they'll see a house and they'll say, and it might be run down, it might be the wrong color, whatever. And they say, I wouldn't buy that house. And say, someone bought that house, they'd say, I wouldn't buy it. I said, well, what if it was $10? Well, I'd buy it if it's $10. What if it's $100? Well, I'd buy it if it's $100. Well, if it's $1,000, well, I'd buy it. It's the same thing with putting away money that we're going to spend for some future unknown solution to the water dilemma that's going to be expensive no matter what the experts tell us is the best solution at the time. And I'm willing to go with whatever the taxpayers and the users here say is the most satisfying, long-term, and affordable solution. But in the meantime, I'd say the same thing. They'd say, well, we can't put money aside for that and invest it, although we could have in 1990. Okay, you tell me we can't put money into it? How about we put $10 a year?
Mm-hmm.
And they say, oh, we can do that. Okay, how about $100 a year? Okay, we can do $100 a year. How about $1,000 a year? Okay, we can do that. Can we also solicit funds from bequests of people that have passed on, or from maybe there's some foundation money elsewhere here and there? Could we get them to contribute? You know, you could be doing that. If you don't have the fund, you don't have way to put money into it. And I don't care if it's $10 a year, I'm $10 happier.
Mm-hmm.
And so I would not be against exploring that possibility, because had that money been put in at $1,000 a year or $10,000 a year for 30 years, we'd have $300,000 that if it had been invested the last 30 years would probably be $1 million and a quarter. And like Bob Dole once, I think it was Bob Dole once said in Congress, $1 billion here and $1 billion there, pretty soon you're talking about real money.
And I think that's what a lot of people are feeling at the end of the day. It just looks so insurmountable as to what's going to be going on. And there is also that political temptation, and I don't know if this is particular to Idaho, if it's particular to Moscow, or if this is everywhere. This could be everywhere, but the idea that once someone says they're going to do something once elected, they have to take care of that entire problem in 6 months. And if they're not able to get it accomplished, well, then they've failed at their campaign promises because, well, you said you were going to do something and you didn't do it yet. How can you expect us to keep voting for you?
Right. Well, and that's why a lot of more entrenched, I'll call them our representatives, but they're really entrenched politicians. And there's as you know from hearing from me, that there's kind of a line between being a politician and being a public servant. Anyway, that in their offices, which are a little better funded, they have professional flak catchers. So they anticipate that, and they have their excuses and their reasoning, one way or the other, scripted out ahead of time. So on city council, we don't have that. I am my own flak catcher, and I do have the help of Nancy, my wife. Well, we're going to get close to 40 years here before long, and so
Congratulations.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Who could imagine that there is a woman that patient? Yeah.
Who's able to do what I'm doing right now?
Right. So anyway, it makes it tougher at the local level, because you do not insulate yourself from the repercussions of some percentage of the population knowing absolutely that something you did was wrong. I've had people spitting mad at me before with decisions we've made at the Board of Adjustment that don't seem too consequential, but there's some aspect of it that just they see as an infringement upon their rights, or a denial of their ability to pursue some recreational activity, or something that you realize was very important to them. It'd be like coming in, and right now, I'll tell you, there's something that's sacrosanct. We can talk about the difficulties we may face with Christ Church or New St. Andrews, or the division we're going to have about if we could prioritize which lands to annex that could allow for new subdivisions with the least infrastructure cost, and the council, you'd like to do that rather than the people who own the land saying, oh, we want to develop it. And we can say, oh my gosh, that's way more expensive than down the new, we're going to have the new corridor of the old Highway 95 that's very easy traffic-wise to incorporate into your town's traffic without a lot of road building. So that's going to become primed. Anyway, we're going to have to somehow prioritize things in a way, and really then hope for the best on a lot of things. But in a small town, you'll get some flack about it no matter what you do.
Mm-hmm. And the effects within a small town maybe feel a little bit more concentrated because there's not as many people. It'd be one thing if you were making this decision and the same number of people or the same percentage of people felt poorly about it, but you're in a big city. And that negative feeling or that flack, you may catch it, but the effects are going to be far more diluted because it's such a bigger place. You're not going to walk down the street and have to immediately deal with a potential argument or conversation with a stranger who doesn't like an action that you took or wants you to take action on something that you as a counselor don't have power to take action on.
Yeah, and so to finish that, then the thing that's sacrosanct that's coming up that I have to advise, I may not be on council, you know. I'd probably have a pretty good chance if we just were drawing straws from a hat. But somehow the voters are going to intercede and not allow that to happen. But I will offer this advice to the other 5 candidates and to the 3 sitting council members and to the mayor of Moscow. Do not do anything to infringe upon people's rights to play pickleball. It's growing, and the people that do it love it, and we have to come out unified, absolutely, as a body in support of pickleball.
Oh, that's funny. And you know what? From the little I know of the people who do play pickleball, which I hadn't heard of until maybe 7 months ago, sacrosanct is a good word for it.
Absolutely. So, in fact, you can see we've gone into a lot of topics here already. And once again, kudos to you for doing this and wanting to peel back some of the layers of what drives voters in Moscow. But we're going to leave that one untouched. If that comes up, we got to get a pledge from everyone that's running. That comes up in one of the forums to come. Is like, we all love 2 things. We all love the farmers market, and we all love pickleball.
There you go. There you go. Maybe one of these days the league itself will host its own forum, and then you can do your obeisance there.
Right.
Let's talk just briefly on the non-campaign, when you're not paying attention to the campaign side of things or the intricacies of our local infrastructure. What are some things that you like to do? What are your hobbies? What is when you're hanging up the cape at the end of the day?
All this, and I encouraged someone to do this yesterday. He said, I'm going to write a letter to the editor and ask the voters of Moscow to not vote for you. And at the end of it, I said, okay, do it. Because I have, since 1 week after arriving here in October, 35 years ago, and this is thanks to Nancy finding this, that there is open gym for playing basketball at University of Idaho, and it's been going on for 50-some years at about noon. Some COVID interrupted. There's been some interruptions because of use of the thing. And he said, we can't have you not available for noon ball. Because Keith Gunther and I are the old guard there. Keith has been playing there maybe 40 years. I've been playing 35 years. And he said, because I'd missed, because of campaign needs and all that, I'd missed about probably over a week of stuff. You know, I try to go once or twice a week, but a couple of weeks I've missed. And so he came up and said, nope, no city council for you. noon ball. You know, after 35 years, you can't pull out.
Oh,
Okay,
man.
so that's one thing I do, basketball. Otherwise, we're big supporters of and love to see what's happened here with the Plus Nordic Ski Club, cross-country skiing in winter. I will lose votes for this, but I love winter. And there's a lot of people in Moscow that hope we never have snow. And my wife and I think, oh, snow, snow, snow. We used to get more snow here. And so cross-country skiing in the winter, the bike trails and bike paths and all that, we're users of that. And here's an aside, that when you go through Berman Creekside Park and see that it has been, so there's some paths there that teach you some things about butterfly habitat and perhaps the sustainability and the importance of flowing water and all that. Interpretive Media Productions, the company that my wife and I and a couple other people headed for years, I was the, if you will, the CFO of that, did the development designs and the scripting and the signage things at Berman Creekside Park, and also the signs you see along the Latah Trail as you ride your bike out there. We're really proud to have been part of the formative process of those, because when we got here, they weren't there. We loved the town anyway. We loved the town the way it was. And now we have connections to Moscow Mountain where you can hike and bike there. A lot of that is because of the efforts of Jim LaFortune, who, despite being employed full-time by the school district, lobbied property owners out there to allow for the development of trails and mountain biking networks, and with the promise that the people around here are really good. We won't cause problems. And decades later, that's proven to be true. So things like that, taking a dog out and walking it on those trails on Moscow Mountain was not an option here in the past. The bike paths, bike lanes in town, they didn't exist. We love the town anyway, but all the things we like to do. And when you get to my demographic, walking your bike around pleasant neighborhoods and admiring the landscaping and things like that are just wonderful activities, and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people do it. And I want to make sure that that's, always available and considered a resource here, and kind of a hidden resource is the walkability of interesting neighborhoods. In fact, we could enhance that by developing some guides that might tell you, oh, if you need a 5-mile walk, here's 2 or 3 of them, so you can alternate them. And also talk about some of the interesting historical, architectural, and artistic points of interest that are along those, because there's a lot. I was on the, what we called at the time, I think it was a planning and zoning subcommittee called the Public Art Task Force, and we were advocating and thinking of ways to encourage people to put sculptures in their yard. They moved away from what I wanted. They were looking more at properties owned by the government, the public art we can put there. But I wanted to expand into how can we encourage people who have an artistic bent to put their sculptures or their Zen gardens and stuff to view, and then connect those with a series. I think it would be great. Then again, I apologize. We don't need anything more to say that we have to say, boy, this town is really worth living in. And they're there. For my wife and I, she has a band she plays in town, and a lot of people do, but a big draw for us has always been our connection with the University of Idaho, whether it's sporting events, which I've always been an advocate for and for watching, and then the Auditorium Chamber Music Series, which brings in some high-level, world-class musicians 4 times a year to go to enjoy. The Washington Idaho Symphony has concerts every year. The Vandaliers singing. So those things that come as a result of being in a small town with a big university that has tons of talented people, at one point, Nancy and I had gone to every performance since it began of dreamers, drummers, and dancers, and so that was always on our calendar with the kids. For a while we went to every performance at the Christmas, the holiday concert that was done at Kibbe Dome where all the schools, it used to be schools from Coeur d'Alene through Grainesville, came in and did their performances to an audience of thousands. We loved participating and contributing to that. So on any given day here, there's two things that make you want to become more part of the community. There's something going on in the evening, and often, as I said, it's connected to University of Idaho events, and it's easy to get to. These things also exist other places. I've lived in Tucson, I've lived in the Bay Area, and they have even better and more stuff. But by the time you have to get in your car and drive and deal with traffic parking, you do not go. You can say to people, oh, come see me, we're going to do this. It's just too intricate. Here it's not intricate. You can go to those things without having to leave the house 2 hours ahead of time.
Mm-hmm. And in some cases, you don't even have to drive there.
Right. Yeah. So that keeps us going, and we actually enjoy and all perhaps benefit from a pretty strongly grounded, whether it's brought on by spirituality or a sense of right and morality that comes from just your own personal philosophy and readings, or if it came from your background in a particular religion. We have a community of good people who are helpful and embracing, and that's not true everywhere.
Mm-hmm. And people, I think you could argue, across the spectrum, regardless of the teams they would play for, so to speak, there's a felt interest and love for the local community that we have here. Like I say, we all love the farmers market and we all love pickleball.
Right.
No one's going to come up and feel particularly strongly in disagreement about that. At the very least, everyone's neutral or neutral positive about it. And at the best, everybody seems to want this thing to continue and want this thing to continue to flourish, which is, like you said, not very common many other places.
And it's, when you talk about that, continue to flourish, even as our population is replaced by the new people. You mentioned 30 years down the line. And it's just like we started at the beginning when you're campaigning. 50% of the things you do campaigning will have the effect you want, which we hope is positive and not, negative for your opponents. But and 50% won't work, but you have to try them. Mm-hmm. And it's the same with this community building. There's some ideas, and I can run more of them by you, that were ideas maybe the government overreached or something like that, and they didn't work out. But it didn't stop us. We didn't take a defeat, and say, well, I'm not going to try anything again. I'm not going to try that again. The 1912 Center is a near failure. The ice rink out there at the Bill Parks Arena, that's a near failure. The workings of the city council for decades, years if not decades, just kept those things alive long enough until and this is perhaps another need that we need to, or something we need to get into more, kept those things, focus on those things long enough until private money came along to finish the job. In another town, all the arguments about the 1912 Center would fill a book. Mm. And in another town, it would have failed. I almost guarantee it would not be that. And I mentioned working for the school. I worked for the school district when that derelict building with the leaking roof and certain parts of certain stairways you couldn't walk on. Joe Darrington and I were about the only ones that went in there because it was full of stored furniture and this and that. And Joe, because he'd been there so long, was the only one that knew which rooms. That's a huge building where he'd kept all this stuff and he'd kept all that stuff. And it was a labyrinth of it would look like a labyrinth of hoarding. But it was actually the way the school district had to store. It was the only place they had. They built on White Avenue a warehouse and a distribution center and a new bus garage since we've been here that alleviated a lot of those difficulties that burned up a lot of hours in Joe's day. But that thing then was basically given to the city, sold to I don't know how Jack Hill got the city of Moscow to actually pay money for that. Is the time it looked like, here, please buy something from me that you're going to have to tear down. But Jack Hill was instrumental in the transfer of that building to the city. And then he got on city council and he was left with the problem once again of owning that building. he got rid of a white elephant and then got on city council and realized, oh my gosh, now it's my problem again. Yes.
Oh, the irony.
Yeah, so, but near failure. So we need people on city council that are problem solvers, that know how to keep the ball rolling without overspending, overreaching, overcomplicating, and keeping most of the population on board, and know how it's worked in the past, know what has failed and why, and know what the sentiment out there is of the population. Now, I don't know the sentiment of the population. I won't say I know it, but I think I know it better than anyone else running this time. And I'm saying I don't know it because every election, you can go door to door and you can talk to your big group that extends into the Kiwanis and extends into the Elks Club and extends into the Moose Lodge and into the, I guess, the International Federation of Pickleball Amateurs, whatever. And you think, I've got a good feel for this because these networks get me in contact with 8, 9, 12, 2,000 people. And then the vote comes and there's 5,000 people. And you scratch your head and go, who are those other 3,000 people? Mm-hmm. And so that's why I say I don't know who they all are. But I know how the voting can trend, and I get back to it. If you overspend, you overreach, you overcomplicate, there's about 2,000 people out there, whether it's true or not, that might pick up on that and make decisions about how they feel about the city, even about issues that aren't totally related to the one they think you've overstepped on, and it influences their overall feeling about the place, and they vote.
Mm-hmm. And that vote affects you, affects decisions that get made going forward, and then the cycle repeats itself because those same people might turn on a dime next election cycle, depending on who knows how many other circumstances.
Yep. But so it's a very interesting little dance to be in the public eye, spending their money, especially when you're spending it on something they think is foolish, and then trying to create a groundswell of support to make it happen. Another big controversy was, and this, you'd think, how can this be a controversy? We have a Gormley pool over there where Gormley Park is. That was the municipal pool, which developed some cracking and they fixed it and it lasted for a couple more years. And I love this story because I had done an addition and a lot of work to totally renovate a house for people who's had a 5-6-year-old through the process. And so there were problems with Gormley Pool, and she was a pool goer, this 6-year-old, thank goodness she couldn't vote. And that was her issue, I think. And then she just told her parents one time, and they had to call me and our next time I saw them, and said, because I'd done all this house, can't Evan just go over there and fix that? So we don't have Gormley Pool, and then it's like, well, this whole idea of spending a lot of money to create a replacement or repair that in a community where 9 months of the year you can't swim outdoor anyway. Along comes the Hamilton money of $12 million that's supposed to be used for the benefit of youth and youth recreational opportunities in Moscow. And you'd think, wow, that's solved our problems. But boy, it created a lot of discussion about how to do it, whether to invest it, whether to spend it. So even that created within the community a lot of dissension, minor dissension about really largesse. We have dissension about how we're going to use that money. But we oh my goodness, did we have public meetings and discussions about covered pool, outdoor pool, indoor. So now you have the money.
What color is
yeah,
the paint
what?
gonna
Yeah,
be?
right. What kind of? Someone's going to say, "Hey, Aiden, you can have a free car." You're
Okay.
like, yeah. You're like, okay, he took it. All right, that cut. We're done. Aiden's got his car.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Right. And then there's going to be a lot of discussions about, wait a minute, well, I don't want that one. Oh, no, if you do that, we can't do that. I can't drive that. I want four-wheel drive. Wait, will this hold my skis and whatever? And I'm going to have this discussion with Aiden then for, well, let's say 18 months till you finally go, oh, my goodness, are we going to have a pool or not? And,
And it's the sort of, well, I'll just bring my own anecdote. I remember when I was a kid getting money for my birthday or a gift card for my birthday, and then we were going to the store, whether it was Target or if there was a Lego store near where we lived, and all of us loved Legos, and you'd show up and you'd have this little amount of money because you got it for your birthday, and you sit in there paralyzed.
Yeah, right, that's it.
And you have no idea. You could buy everything, but not everything because some things are too expensive. But do you like this? Do you prefer this? Does this have the figure that you want or the pieces that you like? Or do you like this franchise or that franchise? And, within 10 minutes, you're wondering, but I just want to spend this gift card. I want to know, but the opportunity to spend it almost makes it harder because now you have no idea what you want because of the opportunities that are presented.
Yeah.
And I imagine it's very similar when $12 million comes down the pipeline and there's all sorts of things that $12 million could be used for, and you have to...
And some people don't want to spend on a pool because they're never going to go to a pool.
Exactly. And
yeah. So, yeah. No, it's so there's that. And let's hope the city council has to deal with that. It was a bequest, really, that closed a $2 million gap that got the 1912 Center going also. Mm-hmm. But the possibility was kept open despite a lot of contention during city council election campaigns. That was a big issue that if it was today, you and I would be talking about. We'd be talking about the 3rd Street Bridge and the 1912 Center and things that don't even matter or can't be influenced by city council. The development of the Highway 95 from Thorn Creek to Moscow and things like that. When those people had to discuss that during their campaigns, their take on it, and by keeping them at the surface, you could call them problems, you could call them needs that weren't universal, whatever, but they kind of got resolved somehow.
Mm-hmm. And it just takes, but you have your hours and hours and months of discussions. And eventually, though, a decision has to be made. And like with all decisions that we've been talking about, it's going to have ripple effects, both good and bad. But at the end of the day, it's going to have to be talked through and dealt with. There's really no way around that when you're in the positions that city officials are in.
Yeah. And you have to be willing to talk to anyone. And everyone says they're a good listener. And that's part of it. The question is, are you good at synthesizing what you hear? Now, public hearings tend to bring people out who are not on the fence about stuff. They don't come. It's people at one end or the other. And so that's not always the entire indicator of the direction you should go. So, but that information is valuable. And so it's not just the information. You listened to it, you heard it, you made good notes, and how can you synthesize that into other things you know? And you want diversity on the council. You want Bob Dudley to be there, to be absolutely coming in there with fire to council meetings and flip charts and showing how if we continue along this spending trend where we're spending $1, we'll just make this up, a dollar more per year for the dunce caps that we're going to give to the council members, that how eventually we're going to bankrupt the city and but things like that. He was tuned into those details and represented a constituency. Okay, then we'll have Linda Paul on council at the same time, representing a constituency that thinks we absolutely need to spend more money to grow farmers market, or even earlier than that, to buy, develop, and save the building that is now City Hall, that was the old post office building, which could have been torn down, whatever. So Linda was part of that process and had to deal with that, and so she represented a constituency that agreed that would be important for the city to take that on, kind of like the 1912 Center. So the council was great, and then there was Tom LeClaire on there that nobody remembers for years, who was just a studious note taker, and he could then take that home and later remember and regurgitate. We've got an advantage now. We have Aiden, who's recording these sessions, and then the city on YouTube has access to every city council meeting going back maybe 10 years now. And so Tom, if Tom LeClaire is around, I feel for you for trying to keep notes and records and files of stuff so that you could remember what transpired 6 months ago. And now you wouldn't have to do that. You should be on council again. So it's easier. But anyway, we've had that type of thing. And Tom was certainly a conservative, social conservative with an important role on council to remind everyone that there's a strong element of social conservatism in the community, and they don't want to be ignored. Even if they're outnumbered, they don't want to be ignored. So council makeups that include that diversity they cause for messy legislation building. They cause for complicated meetings, but they're probably necessary.
Well, this has been a fantastic conversation. I want to briefly give you the opportunity to either camera just be able to pitch your campaign to people and tell people where they can find you.
Right. I have a brochure that some of you have seen that I've handed out, but the information on there is at Evan Holmes, number 4, Moscow, evanholmes4moscow.com. I'm quite willing to delve into anything and probably provide more information about the issue as I know it, and also my opinions. My opinions aren't the only opinion, but I'm happy to share them. I'm not very guarded in that, because that's the way to get elected, because I'm unaffiliated with politics. I'm strongly affiliated with the city. And my pitch is that that's a good presence on council. And I have a lot of historical knowledge, some useful, some anecdotal and amusing, that may come into play. There can be a discourse about how much history we need to know. It's the future we don't want the past. But the council's job is to meld those two together. So I think I'm perfectly placed to do that. I have just really almost wound down my construction and carpentry business to where I, with still having energy and time and enthusiasm for the city, you add that to having knowledge and skills, necessary abilities. And then the big thing I bring, and this is fostered by this city more than I used to have, and that is empathy. Empathy for those that feel marginalized. And and my wife is a big-hearted person. She'll always be part of the process when I'm on council, and she reaches far into the community in a lot of different ways, and especially our concerns and our efforts for early childhood education. She actually started the K+ program for the school district, the beginning of all-day kindergarten, the original curriculum and teaching of that with Terry Summers, who's now the assistant principal at the middle school, and my wife and one other actually started the genesis of all-day kindergarten. So she's very much into the caring and nurturing of the preschoolers and that. And then we have had through our personal journey had many opportunities to care for the elderly and aging in place, and that empathy for those that would like to stay here and would like to participate and are challenged to do so is just another avenue that she's especially useful as my advisor towards. So those are things. Vote. Go out and vote. Vote for me, vote against me. Vote for what the party told you to vote for or not. But think it over and support forums like this. The idea of getting more information out, knowing your council members better, that can never hurt. And so if you do that, I'm happy with the results, however they fall out.
Evan, thank you so much.
You are welcome.
And that concludes my conversation with Moscow City Council hopeful Evan Holmes. With this video, you'll find links to his campaign and more for if you want to find out more about his platform, or if you want to get involved in his campaign yourself. We hope to have more conversations like this coming to you very soon, and as always, if you have any questions, let us know. This is Aiden Anderson with Candidate Candids. See you next time.